before jumping into reading The Power of Now, just wanted to share an observation, or perhaps a habit that I've been recently doing, and I find myself in pockets of time, a minute here or there, perhaps waiting, that instead of getting out of my phone and doing something that perhaps wouldn't benefit me, and for me it wouldn't, perhaps it would be some social media, and I find myself instead going into my app and opening The Power of Now and just dipping into it. And I find those short couple of minutes of just reading a paragraph, or I find that immensely fulfilling, and it's something that I rarely feel if I was to do something perhaps that wouldn't have that nourishment. Of course, nothing on its own can be labelled as bad. So, for example, some people it may provide some good distraction or relieve some stress, to whether it's looking at social media or something else. So I guess the essence of this is what I'm saying is finding what serves you. So in my instance, I find that connecting with something deeper than myself, whether it's words in a book or listening to an audio or watching a video, even in the small pockets of time that can often feel insubstantial or unimportant. And instead using that time just to perhaps step into your body, to feel your inner energy, or just to be present for that 1 minute, whether it's before a meeting starts or that 10 seconds before picking up the phone, before getting in to start your car, or waiting for the car to warm up. You've got it started, and even there it's incredible, just a moment of being present, the depth of that you can experience. So I was there, I actually had 5, 10, 15 minutes, and I found myself gravitating to that, and what was encouraging was the ease of doing it. I found it useful for me to have, the books digitally as an ebook accessible on my phone, so it just makes it easier to dip into, and having the choice as well to, with my social media I've actually got it set up so there's spiritual accounts that I follow, so often a lot of the content is either some pointings or a quote that evokes presence. But I was in that moment of reading on my phone, I was grateful that I can, you don't always have to just distract yourself and go into the mind and And perhaps there's another use, perhaps something more beneficial or fulfilling that those 2 minutes can be used. And I find it helpful not making it into a rule or an expectation that, okay, every moment of time you need to be present, because I find perhaps maybe the mind has come in to try and make this an achievement, or perhaps there's some subtlety to it as well. So perhaps it's what helps me is maybe not setting it as something permanent, where every minute I need to remember to, okay, I need to be reading something spiritual, or I need to be making use of this minute as well, because sometimes, oddly enough, you may need 2 minutes of unconsciousness to return back to the present moment. So everything is made use of, and again, the essence of this is to just be aware of those pockets of time, and perhaps just be aware of if there's anything that that will serve you more than what you currently do. And what I find with the Power of Now, and I guess this can be said about other spiritual books, is that you can almost spend often it's not the case where you've read it and that's it. You can set it aside and move on to another book. I feel these books are meant to be reread and are meant to be almost a companion. Sometimes books can be seen as a tick, ticking off a list or a checkbox. So I've read this, I can tell people I've read this, and it becomes almost part of your CV of knowledge. I've read that, but you may not be able to reference the content of it as much, but it can become like that. I find with some books, I certainly do that, where I've read a book and I'll mention it in a conversation for whatever reason it's said, maybe some egoic reason, or if it was if it just came to mind to bring up. But sometimes I find, if I was to ask myself, okay, what can you remember from the book, or take account of, and sometimes it's very hard to recall. But I find these books here are again designed to be dipped into, to be read. And maybe that's something to keep in the awareness as well, that if there's some books that have touched you, that have really had an impact, perhaps that's something you can revisit, or there's nothing wrong with going back and dipping into it again, as well as reading new content or anything else that catches your eye and you feel, oh, this will be good for me to read. So I'm currently reading a book on depression, and I'd previously started reading a book about codependency and about people being highly sensitive as well. I kind of related to that quite strongly. So, but then I made a decision to perhaps read the book on depression first. I thought this may be something I need to hear more prevalently than anything else. And I try and read it in a sense of not in a way of, in a sense, not trying to remember. Okay, I've read this. I need to remember all of the bits of advice, and that's something that's been quite challenging for me to do. So I almost read it. You can even instill the practice into reading. To be aware and trust whatever is absorbed is needed in that time. And there's almost a freedom of reading. It doesn't become a chore as well, and also not a means to an end. You're not trying to get to read it to get to the end of the book. You're just taking each word, each line at a time, and just allowing yourself to take that in. And then the next line. And so there's almost a spaciousness around the words that you're reading, and at times, quite often, that can become enjoyable to read. As Eckhart has said, that sometimes it's not the what but how, it's the how you do. And by bringing in the practice of awareness into the how of the doingness, then often that can become enjoyable. Whether it's even washing dishes or something that previously you may have just tried to get to the end, or you may have been in thought, or it may have been an unpleasant thing to do. I find bringing in this simple awareness can assist with that as well. So in regards to reading, sometimes it can feel like a chore to read for me. So this has helped me in that way. And almost also taken off the pressure as well. When you hear people, saying they've read this book last week, or they've read, all these books over a certain amount of time, and sometimes you can look at your own reading and think, well, I've been here for 2 months trying to read this book or that book, and by just making it the practice of now as you read, you can almost enjoy it more versus, closing a book, and you can give yourself that good feeling that you've read the book. You can do it in each line, and so it doesn't become, again, a small achievement in the mind. Okay, so I think I've gone a bit off topic there. I think I was just started talking about just something new I was doing with my phone and incorporating time. So let's move into power of now. And I think we read just one section of it, the episode before last. I believe that was about emotional pain, and that's something I'm sure I'm going to read and reread when needed. So the title of this section is The Way of the Cross, and it starts with the reader making a statement. There are many accounts of people who say they have found God through their deep suffering, and there is the Christian expression, the way of the cross, which I suppose points to the same thing. And this is Eckhart's response. We are concerned with nothing else here. Strictly speaking, They did not find God through their suffering, because suffering implies resistance. They found God through surrender, through total acceptance of what is, into which they were forced by their intense suffering. They must have realized on some level that their pain was self-created. Question: how do you equate surrender with finding God? Answer: since resistance is inseparable from the mind, relinquishment of resistance, surrender, is the end of the mind as your master, the imposter pretending to be you, the false God. All judgment and all negativity dissolve. The realm of being, which had been obscured by the mind, then opens up. Suddenly, a great stillness arises within you, an unfathomable sense of peace. And within that peace, there is great joy. And within that joy, there is love. And at the innermost core, there is the sacred, the immeasurable, that which cannot be named. I don't call it finding God, because how can you find that which was never lost, the very life that you are? The word God is limiting, not only because of thousands of years of misperception and misuse, but also because it implies an entity other than you. God is being itself, not a being. There can be no subject-object relationship here, no duality, no you and God. God realization is the most natural thing there is. The amazing and incomprehensible fact is not that you can become conscious of God, but that you are not conscious of God. The way of the cross that you mentioned is the old way to enlightenment, and until recently it was the only way. But don't dismiss it or underestimate its efficacy. It still works. The way of the cross is a complete reversal. It means that the worst thing in your life, your cross, turns into the best thing that ever happened to you by forcing you into surrender, into death, forcing you to become as nothing, to become as God, because God too is no thing. At this time, as far as the unconscious majority of humans is concerned, the way of the cross is still the only way. They will only awaken through further suffering, and enlightenment as a collective phenomenon will be predictably preceded by vast upheavals. This process reflects the workings of certain universal laws that govern the growth of consciousness, and thus was foreseen by some seers. It is described, among other places, in the Book of Revelation or Apocalypse, though cloaked in obscure and sometimes impenetrable symbiology. This suffering is inflicted not by God, but by humans on themselves and on each other, as well as by certain defensive measures that the earth, which is a living, intelligent organism, is going to take to protect herself from the onslaught of human madness. However, there is a growing number of humans alive today whose consciousness is sufficiently evolved not to need any more suffering before the realization of enlightenment. You may be one of them. Enlightenment through suffering, the way of the cross, means to be forced into the kingdom of heaven, kicking and screaming. You finally surrender because you can't stand the pain anymore. But the pain could go on for a long time until this happens. Enlightenment, consciously chosen, means to relinquish your attachment to past and future and to make the now the main focus of your life. It means choosing to dwell in the state of presence rather than in time. It means saying yes to what is. You then don't need pain anymore. How much more time do you think you will need before you are able to say, I will create no more pain, no more suffering? How much more pain do you need before you can make that choice? If you think that you need more time, you will get more time and more pain. Time and pain are inseparable. And the title of this upcoming section is The Power to Choose, and it starts with a question by the reader. What about all those people who, it seems, actually want to suffer? I have a friend whose partner is physically abusive toward her, and her previous relationship of a similar kind. Why does she choose such men? And why is she refusing to get out of that situation now? Why do so many people actually choose pain? Answer. I know that the word choose is a favourite New Age term, but it isn't entirely accurate in this context. It is misleading to say that somebody chose a dysfunctional relationship or any other negative situation in his or her life. Choice implies consciousness, a high degree of consciousness. Without it, you have no choice. Choice begins the moment you disidentify from the mind and its conditioned patterns, the moment you become present. Until you reach that point, you are unconscious, spiritually speaking. This means that you are compelled to think, feel, and act in certain ways according to the conditioning of your mind. That is why Jesus said, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." This is not related to intelligence in the conventional sense of the word. I have met many highly intelligent and educated people who are also completely unconscious, which is to say, completely identified with their mind. In fact, if mental development and increased knowledge are not counterbalanced by a corresponding growth in consciousness, the potential for unhappiness and disaster is very great. Your friend is stuck in a relationship with an abusive partner, and not for the first time. Why? No choice. The mind, conditioned as it is by the past, always seeks to recreate what it knows and is familiar with. Even if it is painful at least it is familiar. The mind adheres to the known. The unknown is dangerous because it has no control over it. That's why the mind dislikes and ignores the present moment. Present moment awareness creates a gap not only in the stream of mind, but also in the past-future continuum. Nothing truly new and creative can come into this world except through that gap, that clear space of infinite possibility. So your friend, being identified with her mind, may be recreating a pattern learned in the past in which intimacy and abuse are inseparably linked. Alternatively, she may be acting out a mind pattern learned in early childhood, according to which she is unworthy and deserves to be punished. It is possible too that she lives a large part of her life through the pain body, which always seeks more pain on which to feed. Her partner has his own unconscious patterns which complement hers. Of course, her situation is self-created, but who or what is the self that is doing the creating? A mental, emotional pattern from the past, no more. Why make a self out of it? If you tell her that she chose her condition or situation, you are reinforcing her state of mind. You are reinforcing her state of mind identification. But it is her mind pattern who she is. Is it herself? Is her true identity derived from the past? Show your friend how to be the observing presence behind her thoughts and her emotions. Tell her about the pain body and how to free herself from it. Teach her the art of inner body awareness. Demonstrate to her the meaning of presence. As soon as she is able to access the power of now, and thereby break through her conditioned past, she will have a choice. Nobody chooses dysfunction, conflict, pain. Nobody chooses insanity. They happen because there is not enough presence in you to dissolve the past, not enough light to dispel the darkness. You are not fully here. You have not quite woken up yet. In the meantime, the conditioned mind is running your life. Similarly, if you are one of the many people who have an issue with their parents, if you still harbour resentment about something they did or did not do, then you still believe that they had a choice, that they could have acted differently. It always looks as if people had a choice, but that is an illusion. As long as your mind, which is conditioned with its conditioned patterns, run your life, as long as you are your mind, what choice do you have? None. You are not even there. The mind-identified state is severely dysfunctional. It is a form of insanity. Almost everyone is suffering from this illness in varying degrees. The moment you realize this, there can be no resentment. The moment you realize this, there can be no more resentment. How can you resent someone's illness? The only appropriate response is compassion. Question. So that means nobody is responsible for what they do? I don't like that idea. Answer. If you are run by your mind, although you have no choice, you will still suffer the consequences of your unconsciousness, and you will create further suffering. You will bear the burden of fear, conflict, problems, and pain. The suffering thus created will eventually force you out of your unconscious state. Question. What you say about choice also applies to forgiveness, I suppose. You need to be fully conscious and surrender before you can forgive. Answer. Forgiveness is a term that has been in use for 2,000 years, but most people have a very limited view of what it means. You cannot truly forgive yourself or others as long as you derive your sense of self from the past. Only through accessing the power of the now, which is your own power, can there be true forgiveness. This renders the past powerless, and you realize deeply that nothing you ever did or that was ever done to you could touch even in the slightest the radiant essence of who you are. The whole concept of forgiveness then becomes unnecessary. Question. And how do I get to that point of realization? Answer. When you surrender to what is, and so become fully present, the past ceases to have any power. You do not need it anymore. Presence is the key. The now is the key. Question. How will I know when I have surrendered? Answer. When you no longer need to ask the question. Okay, that looks like it's the end of the book with that last question there. So, and at the back there's just some paragraphs about Eckhart and his background, and that's also probably freely available, so perhaps that's something that can be read in your own time. So Eckhart talked in the last section about forgiveness and about conscious choice, which is one and the same. That choice happens when we are present. Otherwise we are unconsciously choosing through the mind. And when it comes to forgiveness, is that when you have let go of the past, when you realize that your essence, which is in the here and now, the deepest part of you can't be touched, then forgiveness is, the actual term becomes unnecessary. But instead there's compassion for the other person, for their suffering. And so it comes back to where, the answers are all here in the present. I remember, Eckhart going through his Q&A often in the retreats. That towards the end there's a Q&A where people write down their common questions, and I've heard Eckhart say a number of times that, and other spiritual teachers have said this too, that the answer to almost every question is going to be the same. That same answer about being present can be applied to the questions. And we saw an example of it here in the last questions the reader was asking about. And you can see the complications occur in mind when you are unconscious. You can almost continuously analyze and theorize what this means and that means, and I find with a lot of this it's to cut through all of that and understand that you are missing the simple now. And in the now, it takes care of everything else. We just read the words, dissolves the past when you are in the now. And that's where much suffering arises from. Illness, physical, mental. How many people do you know, are almost wearing their past, almost as a backpack, a heavy past over their shoulders. Maybe you can see it, when you greet them in the morning. When you see them, sometimes you can almost see the heaviness of burden, of past on their face. And perhaps not knowing, we're trying to use the mind to clean the mind. And with that example, you're still going to be identified with it. Yes, there may be pockets of peace where you may resolve something with the thinking of your mind, and I'm okay for the moment, but suddenly again something else will appear that will attack the mind or agitate the mind, and then you've got to try and combat that with more thinking and more thoughts, more analysis. And just as, the title of this book, The Power of Now, Eckhart is continuously pointing to this place. But as we just read recently as well, the mind doesn't like the present moment. And so if you're still identified with mind, then there's going to be a reluctancy or not an understanding of the present moment. And understanding means direct experience. Because the mind will say, all of that meditation, I haven't got time for that right now. I need to solve this problem of why this is happening. But of course the mind is unaware that that peace you're looking for is just is always there. Okay, so I'll have to see about what books I'm going to read moving forward. So the idea of these readings that I'm doing is not primarily just to kind of have episodes of reading. One of the ideas which initially was that it would help me help me to read these books, and by recording them, and perhaps, in a sense, if these recordings help others, then that was more of a motivation for me to read them. So I thought I'd put those two things together, and it would help me read more. I think in these last, episodes over the last couple of months, I think I've been reading this more consistently, and I would have, if I hadn't recorded these readings, then I'd still be reading The Power of Now. I wouldn't have, nowhere near read as much as I have done with these episodes. So by recording them and knowing that I'm doing this, not just for myself, but it's there for others also. I think I mentioned last week where you're often much more willing to do something for others than yourself. So I've tried to take advantage of that to also help myself. And so yes, I would like to continue the readings, and perhaps I would maybe select another book before reading A New Earth, which is something I've been intending to read for a while. I actually purchased A New Earth before The Power of Now, so it's been on my shelf for a while, and I purchased it not knowing anything about Eckhart. It was someone in my past had recommended the book to me, and I just, I trusted them, and so I just bought the book, but it was never read. So that's the end of may feel a bit strange reading from another book in the next episode. It feels like we're quite used to reading from The Power of Now, and this book has started this process. So okay, thank you for joining me for this episode. As always, I wish you well in this moment. I'll speak to you again very soon. Take care.